Hi, my name's Marvel. I sold my beachfront mansion and drained $7 million from my company just to save my mother. She cried in my arms, swearing she'd die without me. But when she got better, she tossed me out, said I was never her real daughter, and handed everything to my sister. Now I live in a one-bedroom apartment I can barely afford while they sip champagne in my house, and just when I thought it couldn't get worse, there was a knock at my door. But not just any knock. The knock that would expose everything. Are you ready to hear what came next? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been betrayed by someone you love the most? Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if your entire life was built on a lie? I used to think the ocean could quiet everything. Every morning before sunrise, I'd stand on the deck of my Malibu home, mug of coffee warming my hands, and watch the water pull back from the sand like it was breathing. To everyone else, that house was a showpiece. Glass walls, cedar beams, a deck big enough for 50 guests. To me, it was a place to disappear. My mother, Evelyn, loved to tell her friends how successful my older sister Celeste was, yet she always called me first when bills piled up or she needed help with her taxes. I never corrected her. I was the invisible one, the daughter who kept things running, who wrote checks, who didn't complain. That night in early spring, the Pacific air felt heavier than usual. We'd gathered at the long dining table overlooking the water. Celeste arrived late, her perfume wafting in before she did, all business and control. She settled at the far end, scrolling through her phone. Mother sat at the head, small and pale, in a silk scarf. I'd spent all afternoon cooking a spread, her favorites from childhood, but she barely touched anything. I tried to spark conversation, but the air was full of brittle silence, the kind that cracks if you move too fast. Halfway through dinner, Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest and slumped against the chair. The clatter of her fork on porcelain was louder than the waves outside. "Mom!" I jumped up, nearly knocking my chair over. Celeste froze for a second, then slowly rose, her expression unreadable. I knelt beside Mother, feeling her tremble. I can't breathe," she whispered. Her voice was thin but deliberate. "Don't let me die, Marvell. Without you, I'll die." Her fingers dug into my wrist like a child's grip. I felt the room tilt, not from fear, but from the way she said it. Not we, but you. We ended up in the ER before midnight. Celeste drove her own car behind the ambulance, silent, leaving me to ride up front with the paramedics. At the hospital, doctors spoke in a rush about experimental treatments overseas, not FDA approved, not covered by insurance. The words blurred together, clinical, detached. Evelyn lay in the bed, eyes wide but tearless, watching me as if I were the only one in the room. Celeste stood in the corner, arms folded, tapping her nails on her phone screen. On the drive back to the house, Mother held my hand the entire way, her thumb tracing little circles into my skin. "You're my only hope," she murmured. "Celeste has her own life. You're the one who's always been there." The highway lights streaked past like falling stars. I swallowed hard, thinking of the company I'd built, the house by the sea. Saving her was worth anything. That's what I told myself. By the end of that week, I'd called my attorney, ignored his warnings, and put the mansion on the market. The agent's voice on the phone was cheerful. "We'll get top dollar, Marvell, no problem." But when I hung up, my hands were shaking. In my office downtown, I signed the papers to liquidate $7 million from my company shares. I didn't even ask Celeste to contribute. I didn't want to give her a chance to say no. When the paperwork was done, I drove back to the house and stood in the doorway while movers boxed up my life. They were strangers, but moved through my rooms like they owned them, rolling rugs, lifting paintings, dismantling the deck furniture. The scent of salt water and cedar mixed with cardboard and tape. I tried to steady my breathing. Celeste appeared in the kitchen doorway, immaculate as always, sipping sparkling water from a glass. "You're really doing this," she said flatly. "She's our mother," I replied. "What else am I supposed to do?" She tilted her head, her lips curling ever so slightly, like she'd just remembered a private joke. "Right," she said, drawing out the word. "What else indeed?" I looked away, focusing on the empty walls where family photos used to hang. "At least I still have my family," I whispered under my breath, not sure who I was trying to convince. From the corner of my eye, I caught Celeste's smirk, quick, sharp, and gone before I could name it. But in that smirk, something shifted inside me, like a hairline crack in glass you only see when the light hits it right. And in that crack, I felt the first hint of a truth that would unravel everything, but I shrugged it off. Maybe she smirked at something on her phone. Maybe I was just exhausted. I told myself I was being paranoid. Too many moving boxes, too little sleep, too much heart. 3 weeks later, I was boarding a private jet with Celeste and Mother, bound for Switzerland. The sky over Los Angeles was low and gray that morning, casting a dull light over the tarmac. I watched ground crew bustle around like they were assembling a stage set. Evelyn wore a tailored beige coat and a cashmere scarf like she was headed to a fashion shoot. Celeste had her sunglasses on inside the cabin, already sipping sparkling water like this was just another business trip. I tried to keep my mind quiet, focused on the goal. Heal her, save her. That was the mission. The jet was absurdly luxurious. Everything smelled of polished leather and citrus. The seats reclined flat, the food was plated like art, and the silence was thick. Mother laid back with her eyes closed while a flight attendant fluffed a pillow under her head. "She's exhausted," I whispered to Celeste, watching her from across the aisle. Celeste just nodded, scrolling her phone. She replied, detached. "Jet lag already, huh?" It was our mother's first flight in years, yet she didn't look frail. She looked, well. I didn't let myself linger on the thought. When we landed in Zurich, a sleek black SUV whisked us straight from the runway to the clinic. Except clinic wasn't the right word. It looked more like a private resort nestled in the Alps. High glass windows, minimalist stone walls, waterfalls carved into the landscape. Staff in crisp white uniforms greeted us at the gate, calling Celeste by name. "Miss Celeste," one of them beamed. "Welcome back." I blinked. Back, but I kept walking. Maybe she'd visited during the scouting phase, I reasoned. Inside, the place was serene, too serene, like the kind of silence that feels curated. Evelyn was escorted to her suite by 2 staff members who fussed over her like she was royalty. I followed behind, carrying her bag, but no one seemed to notice. Even Celeste had fallen into an odd rhythm, more host than guest. She seemed to know where everything was. By the time I settled into my own room, a knock came at the door. "Dinner in the lounge tonight," Celeste said, barely making eye contact. "Mom wants to celebrate making it here." I paused, still holding my unpacked toiletries. "She wants to celebrate?" "Yeah," Celeste replied, her tone light. "She says she's feeling energized." That night, I walked into the clinic's dining area and nearly turned back. The space was candlelit and styled like an upscale restaurant. A long table set for 10, though only 3 of us were expected. Mother sat at the head of the table, dressed in ivory, makeup done, hair curled. She looked vibrant, too vibrant for someone battling a terminal illness. She stood to greet us. "Marvell," she said, arms wide. "You made it. Sit, sit." I felt disoriented, like I'd stepped into someone else's dinner party. Celeste slid easily into the seat beside her. I was placed at the far end. Dinner was served in courses, creamy soups, delicate fish, chilled wine. Evelyn laughed, told stories from our childhood, but when she spoke of us, it was always Celeste and I, never Marvell. "She was always the brave one," Evelyn cooed, resting her hand on Celeste's wrist. "Took care of me during the rough years." I looked down at my untouched plate. My throat burned. I was the one who sold everything. I was the one who emptied my bank accounts. But here I was just background. One of the doctors, a man with an accent I couldn't place, raised his glass. "We are seeing remarkable improvements in your mother," he said. Much credit goes to Celeste for being her constant support system. I nearly choked on my water. Constant support? She hadn't lifted a finger since Mother collapsed. I smiled tightly, feeling my jaw clench. "And the treatments?" I asked. "Are they working that fast?" The doctor gave a rehearsed nod. "Proprietary methods. You'll see, her spirit is strong." After dinner, I slipped away. I needed air. I wandered the corridors of the clinic, ending up on a terrace that overlooked the mountain valley. Cold wind cut through my sweater, but I didn't care. The silence up here was honest. At least, I stayed out until my fingers went numb. When I returned to my hallway, I heard something behind the guest suite door. Laughter. 2 voices, Evelyn and Celeste. I inched closer, heart pounding. Their laughter dropped into hushed tones, muffled by the thick walls. Then I heard it, my mother's voice, clearer now. "Don't worry," she said. "She'll keep paying." She always does. Everything in me stilled. I wasn't saving her. I was being played. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling in that cold Swiss room, my heart pacing like it was late for something I couldn't name. I replayed her voice over and over in my head. She'll keep paying. She always does. But by morning, I'd convinced myself I'd misheard it. Maybe it was out of context. Maybe she was joking. Or maybe I needed to stop acting like some paranoid stranger in my own family. She was sick, I whispered to myself on the plane ride back to Los Angeles. She didn't mean it. But something had shifted in me, and even though I buried it deep, it traveled home with me. It followed me into my old apartment, into the kitchen where I used to bake for her, into the office where my savings account now stared back at me like an open wound. I told no one, not even my closest friend Danielle, who noticed I wasn't returning calls. Weeks passed, then a month, then another. Until one morning, I got an envelope with thick ivory paper embossed with gold edges. A formal invitation. Evelyn Sinclair cordially invites you to an evening of celebration and gratitude, honoring life, love, and recovery. The address was the family estate, the house I'd grown up in, the one she sold when Dad died and bought back years later through a real estate miracle, or so she claimed. I hadn't stepped foot inside since before her collapse. I almost didn't go. I stood in my closet with a silk dress in one hand and a pair of black slacks in the other, wondering why I even cared. But something in me, pride maybe, or a lingering hope for acknowledgement, said, "Go." The estate looked like a magazine spread. White tents lined the backyard, strings of warm lights crisscrossed above tables dressed in gold and cream. The scent of roses, champagne, and expensive candles clung to everything. I arrived just as the sun dipped behind the hills. People were already clinking glasses, taking photos in front of a giant gold "Welcome Back, Evelyn" banner. Celeste was glowing in a fitted navy dress, one hand on Mother's back like she was her handler or bodyguard, or worse, her brand manager. Mother looked radiant, holding court among distant cousins and old friends like she hadn't ever seen the inside of an ER. Her scarf was gone. Her posture was perfect. I approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt the flow of people congratulating her. "Marvell!" She finally spotted me, voice bright. "You came." There was no hug, just a once-over glance and a polite smile. She reached for my hand like I was a guest speaker, not the woman who liquidated her life to keep her alive. Before I could respond, a cousin leaned over and said under his breath, "Nice of Celeste to finally step up, huh? We were all wondering when she'd grow a spine." Poor you. Never really looked comfortable in that role anyway. I blinked, trying to absorb his words. But he was already smiling at the next guest, glass raised. They didn't know. None of them knew. I wanted to scream, I gave up everything, but who would care? The story had already been rewritten. A few minutes later, Mother raised her glass. "I want to thank you all for being here," she said, voice clear and warm. "These past months have taught me the value of love, persistence, and knowing who truly stands by your side." She turned to Celeste. "This woman right here," she continued, lifting Celeste's hand, "is the reason I'm here tonight. She's my anchor, my savior." There it was again, That word, savior, the same one she whispered to me with shaking hands while gasping for breath, convincing me to burn down my life, and now she was handing it over like a shiny trophy. The room broke into applause. Celeste looked over at me briefly, then turned back to accept a kiss on the cheek from Mother, and then Evelyn pulled out a small velvet box. "Before we cut the cake," she said, "I have a gift." Inside was a bracelet, diamond-studded, elegant, unmistakably expensive. "This," she said, "was meant for someone who never let me fall. Celeste, I love you." The bracelet slid onto Celeste's wrist like it had been made for her. The crowd swooned, cameras flashed. I sat frozen, every muscle locked in place. I didn't want the bracelet. I didn't even want to thank you at that point. What I wanted was truth. I wanted someone, anyone, to say, "That woman gave up everything. She kept you alive." Instead, I was invisible. I stood up quietly, murmured something about needing air, and slipped out through the patio doors. The backyard stretched into the garden where we used to play as kids. I walked to the old stone bench under the sycamore tree and sat down, the grass damp against my heels. Then I heard them. Laughter. Low at first, then clearer as the back doors creaked. Celeste's voice. "Well, that was easy," Mother replied. "Don't worry, she won't fight. She never does." They both laughed again, like it was a game, like I was a dog who always came when called. My eyes welled, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not for them, not anymore. That night, I stopped pretending. If they wouldn't see me, fine, but they would feel me. In the days that followed, I replayed their words like a broken voicemail stuck on repeat. That soft chuckle from my mother, the smug certainty in Celeste's voice, it clung to me like mildew. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd sit in my apartment at 2 a.m., scrolling through bank statements, travel invoices, insurance claims, and something didn't add up. The clinic in Switzerland billed over $500,000, but the invoices listed luxury spas, gourmet dining, vineyard tours, and personal shopping assistance. Hydrotherapy, one line item read. Another, private helicopter tour, Zurich to Geneva, optional champagne. Optional? I cross-checked dates and locations against my credit card statements. On the day my mother supposedly underwent her most grueling procedure, she had charged a 6-course meal at a Michelin-starred restaurant with a wine pairing that cost more than my monthly rent. I sat back in my chair, clutching the printed receipts in my hands like they might combust. They hadn't just lied. They'd mocked me, used my money to throw themselves a vacation under the guise of dying. 3 weeks later, I received an email from Evelyn's assistant, a subject line so polite it stung. Family Financial Review. Attendance required. The meeting was scheduled at the downtown office where our family's lawyer, Martin Densley, practiced. I hadn't been in that building since Dad's estate had been finalized a decade ago. I arrived 5 minutes early. Evelyn was already seated at the long oak table in her signature cream blazer, pearls gleaming like little lies around her neck. Celeste, perfectly put together in pale blue, sat at her right, mirroring the same posture, the same clipped smile. I took the seat across from them without a word. Martin adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. "Thank you all for coming. Evelyn, as per your request, I've prepared the updated estate documents reflecting your current wishes." I didn't blink. I just stared at the folder in his hands. He continued, "Effective immediately, Celeste has been named the sole medical proxy, financial power of attorney, and executor of the estate." I froze. Martin slid the paper across the table toward me. "Your name has been removed from all fiduciary responsibilities. There's a letter of acknowledgement to sign." My hands stayed in my lap. "Removed?" Evelyn's voice was almost bored. "You've done enough, dear. It's time your sister took over the real work." I looked at her, really looked. There was no gratitude in her face, no softness. Just cold precision, like this was a task she'd been rehearsing for months. "The real work?" I said, the words catching in my throat. You mean bleeding me dry and rewriting history? Evelyn exhaled sharply, like I was an inconvenience. Don't be dramatic. Martin looked between us, clearly uncomfortable but not surprised. I turned to Celeste. You knew. She didn't deny it. She just tilted her head. You always made it so easy. That was it. The final confirmation. The slap without the hand. I stood up slowly. My legs weren't shaking. My voice didn't waver. If you think I'll stay silent forever, you're mistaken. Evelyn smirked. Silence is all you've ever been good at. For a moment, the room went still. Martin looked down at his notes, like he couldn't bear to witness what had just unfolded. I walked out without signing anything. The hallway outside felt colder than the room. My heels echoed against the marble floor, each step louder than the last. I could feel them watching me through the glass wall as I walked toward the elevator. Just before the doors closed, Celeste slipped through. I said nothing. She waited until we were alone, then leaned in. This is just the beginning, she whispered. You'll lose everything. The doors opened at the lobby, and she stepped out without looking back. I stayed inside, staring at the numbers on the elevator panel. For the first time, I felt the truth settle like a stone in my stomach. They were never going to stop. It started with a knock at the door. Not frantic, not loud, just deliberate, like someone delivering something they knew would change everything. I had been standing in the kitchen, half listening to the hum of the refrigerator, staring into a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The silence in the apartment had started to settle like dust on my skin, heavy, inescapable. I opened the door to find a man in a dark suit holding a thin envelope. He didn't smile, didn't introduce himself, just handed it to me and turned away like it was any other Tuesday. The envelope was thick with legal weight. I closed the door slowly, hands already trembling. Inside were papers outlining the forced buyout of my shares in the company, my company. The same business I had helped build from scratch, pouring in the last of my savings and sanity during the chaos of my 30s. The signatures were already there. Evelyn, Celeste, the board. My name was the only one absent from the signatures, yet the one most affected. My vision blurred. I tried to read the fine print again, but each word felt like a nail being driven into the foundation of what I had once believed was family. I drove to the office the next morning, hoping, stupidly, that this was some clerical error. The receptionist, who once greeted me with warm smiles and questions about my weekend, barely lifted her head. The conference room door was already open when I got there. They were waiting. Evelyn sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her pearl earrings glinting under the recessed lighting like teeth. Celeste lounged beside her, legs crossed, sipping on what I could only assume was green tea. The rest of the board, people I had once considered allies, sat with neutral expressions, like actors in a play they couldn't rewrite. We've decided to move in a new direction, Evelyn said, smoothing the edge of her blazer. I sat down, my palms flat on the cool table surface. You're forcing me out? It's already done, Celeste said, without looking at me. It's just a formality now. I couldn't even feel my hands anymore. The money I invested, the shares, the mansion, all of it. Evelyn interrupted me with a soft sigh. Sweetheart, those were gifts. You said yourself that you wanted to help. I said that to save you, I hissed. And you did, she said with a small smile. But now it's time to let the people with stronger vision take over. The board members nodded almost in unison, like puppets rehearsed to respond to the puppeteer's strings. One of them, John, who used to pitch me new marketing ideas with real excitement, avoided my eyes. Another offered a polite shrug. You've always been too emotional for business, Celeste added, her tone so casual it physically hurt. I walked out of the building slower than I'd walked in. My car was parked on the side street, but I didn't get in. I just stood there, staring at the glass facade that reflected a woman I no longer recognized. By the end of the week, the apartment was in boxes. Movers I didn't know were hauling away furniture I had chosen piece by piece. The couch with the dent in the cushion from too many sleepless nights. The dining table with the scratch from my niece's science project. Gone. I stood in the middle of the living room, watching strangers dismantle the life I'd built. I felt like a guest at my own eviction. After they left, I tried calling Angela, a friend I'd known for years through business circles. No answer. Then Karen, straight to voicemail. One by one, the names on my phone blurred into insignificance. They weren't friends. They were extensions of the family I no longer belonged to. They weren't picking sides. They'd already picked them. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, as light filtered through half-closed blinds. My phone rested on the floor next to me, screen black, contacts meaningless. I whispered into the silence, maybe they were right. Maybe I don't matter. And then it buzzed. I stared at the screen. Unknown number. No contact name. Just a message. You need to see the truth. Meet me. That was all. No name. No location. Just an invitation. But in that moment, amid the boxes, the silence, and the ache of betrayal, it felt like the first lifeline I'd been thrown in weeks. The message stared back at me like it had weight, like it was breathing. You need to see the truth. Meet me. I read it again, then again. Each time, my mind tried to convince me it was a prank. Or worse, another trap set by Celeste. I hovered over the delete button more than once, thumb trembling above the screen. But I didn't delete it. Not yet. I sat alone on the mattress in my tiny rented room, my back pressed against the cold wall. It wasn't just that the room was bare. It was the emptiness inside me that echoed louder than any silence the walls could offer. For hours, I didn't move. I didn't eat. I didn't even cry. I just stared at that one message. By 8:30 p.m., something inside me shifted. A sliver of curiosity cracked through the fog of despair. If it was a trap, fine. I had nothing left to lose. But if it wasn't, if there was even a thread of truth waiting, I owed it to myself to find it. I changed into jeans and a faded hoodie. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Just another woman walking the streets of downtown LA, invisible by design. I took the subway 2 stops, then walked the final blocks to the diner. It was a place I hadn't been to since college. Greasy floors, cracked booths, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't played music since Bush was president. The air smelled of burnt coffee and grilled onions. Somehow it comforted me. He was already there, sitting in the far corner, back to the wall. Hoodie pulled up, face low. He looked more like a stranger than anyone I'd ever called family, but something in my gut tugged. I hesitated by the door, unsure if I should turn around. He looked up, and I froze. Lucas, my grandfather. I hadn't seen him since my late 20s, when a fallout between him and Evelyn split the family into silent factions. He was supposed to be senile by now, lost in some desert town. But here he was, clear-eyed, alert. Sit, he said. I did, because there was no other choice. I don't have long, he said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. This'll tell you more than I can in a single night. What is this? My voice cracked. It had been days since I'd spoken aloud to anyone. Proof. He glanced around. They used you, Marvell. Evelyn was never sick. Celeste never supported her. They used your money to travel, renovate, buy art. They staged the whole clinic trip. That place in Switzerland? It's a private resort owned by a friend of Evelyn's from her first marriage. My stomach turned. I shook my head. No, I saw the IVs, the doctors, all for show. You think money can't buy performance? He leaned in. You were the bank. Celeste was the front. Evelyn pulled the strings. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside, receipts, hotel bills, credit card statements, and photos. Evelyn smiling at a vineyard, dancing at what looked like a wedding. One image caught my breath. Celeste in a hot spring, champagne in hand, time-stamped the same week Evelyn supposedly underwent chemotherapy. I couldn't breathe. I thought you deserved to know, Lucas said. I stayed out of this for too long, but I watched you lose everything, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I nodded slowly. Why now? He didn't answer right away, just sipped his water and said, Because this family forgets who bleeds for them. You bled, and now they think you're dead. You're not. I stared at the man across from me, the man Evelyn had called paranoid and manipulative my entire life. He looked tired, but not wrong. We didn't speak much after that. He left before I did, disappearing into the night like a ghost. I stayed behind, staring at the papers. Each line, each charge, each signature, it all screamed one thing. I had been nothing more than a wallet. I didn't notice the time until the waitress dropped the check and asked if I was okay. I nodded, paid in cash, and stepped back out into the night. As I turned the corner toward the subway, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. You think you're clever now? Celeste's voice was ice. Dig all you want. But I'm warning you, stop. You're not built for this. She hung up before I could say a word. The street around me felt suddenly colder. The way her voice cracked, not with fear, but with control, told me she wasn't bluffing. And yet, if they were warning me, that meant I was finally getting close. They were watching. They were nervous. I took the train back in silence. My eyes burned, but wouldn't release a single tear. Back in my room, I laid the documents out across the floor. The photos, the dates, the receipts. I traced the timeline, saw the overlap, the lies, the absolute orchestration of my downfall. I whispered to the empty room, if this is real, then everything I lived for was a lie. And then it happened again. A knock. Not a text. Not a call. Another knock on the door. My body froze, then moved. I walked to the door, every step slow, deliberate. And this time, the knock didn't bring loss. It brought a fire I never thought I had. The knock echoed once more. Steady. Certain. I opened the door, half expecting danger, half daring it. But it was Lucas. He stood there under the flickering hallway light, briefcase in hand, face weathered but focused. There was no smile, no hello, just a quiet nod, and the sense that everything was about to shift again. I brought the rest, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door behind him and watched him settle the briefcase on my small folding table. It creaked under the weight. He sat. This is where the fire either burns through you or for you, he said calmly. You've got to choose. Silence or war. I said nothing, just sat down opposite him, my pulse loud in my ears. He opened the briefcase slowly, like he was opening something sacred. Inside were stacks of manila folders, paper-clipped reports, flash drives. He slid one folder forward. Start with this, Evelyn's medical records, or lack thereof. Dates don't match, names of clinics don't exist. You were sold a story, and you bought it with your life. My fingers hovered above the pages. I wasn't sure I was ready, but my hand moved anyway. There's more, he continued. Property transfers, bank trails. Evelyn didn't just take your money. She laundered it through foundations that never existed. Guess who signed off on them? I didn't want to guess. I already knew. Celeste. Bingo. I finally looked up. Why are you doing this now? Because your mother thinks I'm old and irrelevant. That makes me dangerous. His voice didn't crack. They never expected you to fight back. They still don't. I stared at the papers, then at the cheap curtains swaying in the breeze. I wasn't a fighter. At least I hadn't been. But something inside me had been stirring, quietly, persistently. Grief had broken me. But betrayal had rebuilt something else. I didn't know what to call it yet, but it had sharp edges. What do I do with this? I asked. Lucas leaned in, eyes steady. You go where they never thought you'd dare. Court. You file, you make it legal, and you watch how fast their empire starts to tremble. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No music, no monologue. Just me, quietly nodding. That was all. But it was enough. The next morning, I took the papers and walked to the courthouse. Not in heels, not in silk, just sneakers, jeans, and resolve. I waited in line, filled out forms, paid fees with the last money I had in my name. Then I filed a petition to contest every asset transfer made within the past 12 months, citing fraud and undue influence. The clerk didn't even glance twice. When I walked out of that building, the air felt different, heavier, but I also breathed deeper. That afternoon, I returned home to find Celeste already there, sitting on my mattress like she owned it. Her hair was perfect, her eyes full of disgust. "You really did it," she said, arms crossed. "You filed." I set my bag down and didn't speak. "You know what this means, don't you?" Her voice dropped, venomous. "You're trying to take down your own mother. Over what? Some money? Some fantasy that she owed you something more?" I crossed the room, pulled out the folder from my bag, and laid it on the table. "She didn't owe me anything, but she lied. You both did." Celeste stood, her laugh low and sharp. "You think anyone will believe you? You've always been the shadow, Marvell, hiding behind other people's strength." I looked at her then, really looked. "No," I said calmly. "I was the quiet one. There's a difference. Shadows don't hide. They reveal the light when it burns too bright." She scoffed. "You've read one too many greeting cards." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The entire apartment shook, but I didn't flinch. Night fell slowly. I made tea I didn't drink. I organized the papers again and again, like it would calm my thoughts. It didn't. But I kept going anyway. By 11 o'clock p.m., I was finally lying on the floor, sorting documents into piles, when I heard a soft slide against the door. Not a knock, just a sound. I got up and opened it. No one was there. But on the ground was a manila envelope. Inside, photos of me. Walking to the diner, leaving the courthouse, on the train, at my door, and a note, "Back down, or we'll destroy you." My hands trembled, but I didn't drop the photos. Instead, I folded the note, placed it next to Lucas's files, and whispered to the dark room, "No, not this time." They thought fear would shut me down. But this time, fear had company. It had fire. I didn't sleep much after the envelope arrived. I sat up most of the night, staring at the ceiling as the city outside my window moved on without me. The message had been clear: back down or be destroyed. But silence wasn't my language anymore. By morning, I wasn't scared. I was focused. 3 days later, Evelyn invited the entire family to a formal gathering at the estate, one of those high-pressure, high-polish affairs where everything was manicured, right down to the lies. The excuse was a family celebration, but everyone knew better. She wanted a stage. She wanted to announce the final chapter of her carefully curated narrative, that Celeste was the golden daughter, and I'd always just been the cautionary tale. I arrived alone, not in designer, not in pearls, just black slacks, a white button-down, and a resolve thicker than armor. Lucas stood by the front gate when I walked in. He gave me a small nod, but didn't speak. We'd already said all we needed to. The rest would play out now. Inside, everything smelled like money: polished marble floors, tall glass vases stuffed with orchids, waitstaff in crisp uniforms weaving through clusters of cousins and distant relatives sipping champagne. Celeste was front and center, as always. Her smile was practiced, and today it had teeth. Evelyn sat beside her on the raised platform, beaming like a queen preparing to pass down her crown. When she stood, the room quieted. Cameras flashed. Someone clapped preemptively. It was revoltingly perfect. "I want to thank you all for being here," Evelyn began, voice smooth like honey over poison. "Today is not just a celebration of legacy, but of loyalty, And so, I've asked our family attorney to join us as we formalize a transition that's long overdue. The lawyer stepped forward, documents in hand. His face gave nothing away. Trained neutrality. But his hands didn't shake. Mine did. Evelyn's eyes scanned the room. It is with pride and peace that I name Celeste as the sole executor of my estate. She has proven herself to be the daughter who has stood beside me through every storm, every trial. She is, and always has been, my true legacy. Gasps rippled gently through the guests. Whispers floated just loud enough to reach me. Poor Marvel. She's probably used to it by now. Celeste always did shine brighter. I didn't blink, I just watched. The lawyer lifted his pen. That was my cue. I stood, no drama, no raised voice, just a clear, firm tone that cut through the room like glass. Before you sign anything, there's something everyone here should see. All eyes turned. I walked slowly toward the platform, pulling a small file from my bag. I handed it directly to the attorney. Please review these documents before proceeding. I believe you'll find them illuminating. Evelyn's face stiffened. Celeste's jaw clenched. I caught the smallest twitch in her hand as it reached for Evelyn's, instinctively. The lawyer opened the folder. Inside were the copies Lucas had given me. Hospital records that didn't match real institutions, bills from 5-star resorts labeled as treatments, photo timestamps showing Evelyn poolside while supposedly in a clinic. As the lawyer flipped through the papers, the energy in the room shifted. What had been elegant tension turned to unease. I faced them both, mother and sister. You never needed saving. You needed my silence. And for a while, you got it. But not anymore. Murmurs turned to audible outrage. A few relatives moved closer to see the documents for themselves. One aunt gasped, then recoiled. A cousin whispered, "Is this real?" Evelyn tried to recover, voice brittle beneath its charm. "This is absurd, fabricated. The jealous revenge of a daughter who couldn't handle responsibility." The lawyer didn't move. His fingers were still flipping through the pages. Then Celeste cracked. "She's lying," she snapped, stepping toward me. "She's always been unstable, bitter. Look at her, living in that dump of an apartment, chasing shadows. This is desperation, not truth." I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. The lawyer cleared his throat, finally breaking the silence. "Some of these documents warrant serious examination. I would advise halting today's proceedings until a formal review can be conducted." The crowd erupted, some in protest, others in disbelief, but the momentum had already shifted. Evelyn sat down hard, her face pale but composed. No tears, no apology, just fury she could no longer hide behind lace and legacy. Celeste stood frozen, her stare locked on me. There was no sister in that gaze, only rage and disbelief. I leaned in slightly, just enough for her to hear me over the chaos. "This isn't the end. This is the reckoning." And I meant it. After that day at the estate, the world went quiet in a way I hadn't expected. No triumphant phone calls, no parades, just silence. The kind that settles after a storm and makes you wonder if you imagined the whole thing. But I didn't, and neither did they. Justice wasn't victory, it was survival. In the days that followed, I stayed mostly indoors. The headlines were blunt. Heiress exposes mother's lies, Celeste Langford, falls from grace. But they moved on quickly, as news always does. The public's curiosity faded fast. What lingered, though, was the damage, the kind that doesn't make headlines, the kind that sits with you in the quiet. My phone barely rang. Most of the numbers in my contacts had been more attached to Evelyn's influence than to me. Even some of the people who had once smiled a little too wide in my direction avoided eye contact at the grocery store now. And yet, I didn't feel lost. Not anymore. I had my own place, small but mine. No maids, no polished granite, just a worn kitchen table, creaky floors, and a window that caught the afternoon sun just right. I started waking early, not because I had to, but because I could. Some mornings, I'd walk to the corner cafe and sit alone with a cup of black coffee, watching strangers laugh with their kids or argue over nothing. It felt real. And real, after everything I'd lived through, felt like a kind of miracle. Evelyn had disappeared from the public eye almost entirely. According to one of the gossip columns, she'd holed up in a retreat outside of Santa Barbara. No statements, no apologies, just silence. Celeste tried to spin the story, paint herself as a victim of manipulation, but even her charm couldn't polish the cracks anymore. People backed away, clients, friends, even her fiancé, if you could call him that, quietly vanished from her orbit. She never reached out to me. I didn't expect her to. The truth didn't bring me money or applause. It brought peace. Weeks passed. One evening, just after sunset, there was a knock at my door. It startled me. People didn't knock here. I opened it to find Lucas standing there, holding a thermos. "I brought tea," he said, simple as that. He stepped in, took off his coat like he'd done it 100 times before. I poured the tea into mismatched mugs. Mine had a crack down the side I always drank from anyway. We sat on the floor, surrounded by the soft hum of the city through the window. No speeches, no drama, just two people who had walked through fire and still had the nerve to sit in the warmth. He raised his mug slightly. "Family," he said, "is not who shares your blood. It's who shares your truth." I nodded. I didn't need him to say more. The last time someone made tea for me was at the clinic. That cup had gone cold, abandoned, half-sipped in the middle of another betrayal. But this one was different. It was full, hot, steady. Later that week, I took a long walk through a small park a few blocks from my apartment. I didn't have anywhere I needed to be, which in itself was a strange freedom. I watched kids chase pigeons, parents half scolding, half laughing. Couples shared benches, their legs brushing accidentally on purpose. I stood near the fountain and closed my eyes. I still felt the ache sometimes, that hollow bruise where love used to live. Evelyn had given birth to me, but she'd never given me warmth. Celeste had once shared my toys, my secrets, but she'd never shared my heart. That kind of betrayal didn't go away. It just quieted. But for the first time, I felt something else take its place. Relief. No more pretending. No more performance. They couldn't erase me, not from the world, and more importantly, not from myself. I had been cast as the problem, the unstable one, the emotional wreck. But I was still standing. I walked home slowly, letting the air settle on my skin like an old friend. That night, before bed, I opened the drawer by my nightstand. Inside were the papers Lucas had given me, the ones that shattered everything. I didn't look at them. I just placed my hand over them, gently. Like closing a chapter without reading the last line. I lost a mansion, millions, and a mother's love. But I found something rarer, myself.